1. Einstein's iconic tongue-out photo, a photo of Albert Einstein. Is his tongue out? If it is, then you are probably viewing the famous image taken by photographer Arthur Sasse on March 14, 1951, at the renowned scientist's 72nd birthday event that took place at Princeton's Institute for Advanced Studies. Being pretty famous, he had attracted the paparazzis who had surrounded his car together with Doctor Frank Aydelotte, former director of the institute, and Aydelotte's wife Marie Jeanette. After allegedly yelling "enough is enough," or "that's enough," the wording depends on the source, with his tongue sticking out at one point or another, Sasse took a picture. No matter how frustrated Einstein must have been at first, he had several copies of the picture made for his friends. Einstein's image had been recreated on everything from brick walls to fields of maize, fostering the common view of a peculiar figure like Einstein. His untidy hair likely helped as well. 2. Elvis meets Nixon. The meeting between presidents and renowned individuals is not unusual. However, the background of the photo of Elvis Presley and President Richard Nixon is so extraordinary. By 1970, one can say that the life of the king of rock and roll was beginning to get bizarre. This was after he got some information that his life was under threat from various groups, hence he would appear publicly carrying several guns. In that year, he had already spent over $100,000 for Christmas presents, which included 10 cars and 32 guns. On an impromptu trip to the national capital, Elvis got to see Nixon. In this context, arranged means waltzing into the presidential mansion without prior notice, requesting an audience with the head of state. By then, he'd amassed a collection of police badges, but decided that the one he craved was the Federal Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs badge, according to the Smithsonian Magazine reports. Presley would receive nothing special with the badge, but his wife Priscilla described this in his autobiography as the narc badge represented some ultimate authority to him. With it, he could legally enter any country with both guns and drugs. Nixon, however, was most likely keen to be associated with a celebrated pop culture icon, even though he was not at his peak. Elvis was reviving his career, and the president believed that the musician could assist him in his fight against the hippie movement, which represented countercultural forces that appealed to adolescents. Elvis came to the meeting in a purple velvet suit with a gun for the commander-in-chief. Toward the end of the meeting, the president did tell Bud Crow, one of his advisors, get him that badge he wants so badly, which is baffling. However, what he received was an honorary one. Clint Hill, a Secret Service agent, observed later, saying Elvis had an illusion of power that he did not have, but he left with a smile on his face. 3. The blue marble. The best-known picture of Earth is that one which shows the icy South Polar region, surrounded by whirling clouds with Africa below it. There is no doubt as to why it is referred to as the blue marble. However, there is still no information available about the person who took the photo. We do know this much, though. On December 7, 1972, a few hours after leaving Cape Canaveral, Apollo 17 launched, and some 28,000 miles away from us was the Saturn V rocket. According to an audio tape, we know that each of the 3 astronauts were responsible for taking turns with the Hasselblad camera to capture a photographic record of the Earth during the Apollo 17 mission. However, the recorded conversation fails to reveal who among them pressed the shutter button for this particular image, titled The Blue Marble. Commander Eugene Cernan, scientist Harrison Jack Schmitt, and Ronald Evans have refused to confess. Their explanations were contradictory. Each of the 3 claimed to have taken the picture. According to Outside Magazine 2017, Mike Gentry, a former NASA archivist, had an opinion. I believe that the astronauts met and decided not to disclose anything, and in case they were asked about it, they would just say that they took it. One probable reason might be that all of them wanted the honor. 4. Kevin Carter's controversial photo, Starving Child in Vulture. The picture is printed as a Pulitzer Prize-winning photograph, highlighted for its social impact and also for the ethical issues it raised. In 1993, a South African photojournalist traveled to Sudan to capture the famine. The picture he took of a fallen kid being stalked by a vulture generated public condemnation, not only due to its sickening nature, but also attracted backlash to the cameraman for not aiding the girl whose image he took. In famine-stricken South Sudan, photographer Kevin Carter took a photograph of a small girl. You will see a vulture standing by the girl ready to pick at any remaining flesh. Kevin Carter captured this image and scared the bird off. And when it was all said and done, she was so very lucky that she made it out alive or survived till safety came around sometime later. It earned him the highest possible award in journalism, the Pulitzer Prize, in 1994. However, his failure to assist her drew criticism from many people around him, who accused him of not fulfilling his moral obligations. He couldn't bear the anguish and took his own life after 3 months due to what he had experienced in Sudan. That day never left Carter's memory until he committed suicide in 1994. It should be noted that the mother was seemingly right there when this happened, according to the mother, but contrary to this child's life being completely endangered by the vulture. It's important to also mention that this shot was taken using a long telephoto lens that makes the background seem closer because of compression than it was, putting the bird up close side by side with the kid. 5. Winston Churchill's angry portrait. Photographer Yusuf Karsh took the picture of a frowning Winston Churchill at the Parliament buildings in Ottawa, Canada. By taking away his cigar, Karsh had upset Churchill and established a portrait that is considered to be the most iconic ever made. "It was at this point that I captured the shot of him," said Karsh. "When I returned to my camera, he seemed so aggressive that he might have eaten me," Karsh implied. Attacked Pearl Harbor, Churchill was in Ottawa expressing his gratitude to the Allies for their help. He stubbornly held onto his cigar without knowing that a photographer was already in place to take his portrait. This photographer then went right up to Churchill, took the cigar from his mouth, and captured him on camera wearing that well-known scowl pose. In the words of Churchill, who spoke to Karsh, "One can even bring a roaring lion to a standstill for purposes of photography. The image is among the most reproduced political portraits ever." It encouraged photographers to take pictures that were not only candid but also less critical for political leaders. 6. Lewis Hine's famous image Cotton Mill Girl. Investigative photographer Lewis Hine traveled through the United States between 1908 and 1912, capturing pictures of working kids from factories, farms, and coal mines, with some being of age 3, and all of them who worked for 65 to 70 hours, whereas others went up to 80 per week. This photo of a young girl by Hine is what made people start thinking differently concerning child labor, hence there were introductions made on laws regarding children's employment. The National Child Labor Committee was created in 1904 to advocate for child workers in America. But its members quickly discovered that they only possessed one potent weapon, showing the real-life situations of the children working. The National Child Labor Committee believed people would call for transformation upon looking at these pictures. Consequently, Lewis Hine, the investigative photographer, met Sadie Pfeiffer, who was one of the smallest workers there. The child was only 48 inches tall, and the photographer believed he could influence people's perspective with one photograph among many, and it turned out to be, with several others, one of the most important images for the campaign. These were able to reduce the population of working minors by 50% within 10 years. 7. Alberto Corda's iconic photo of Che Guevara, Guerrillero Heroico. It is hard to believe that the image captured on 5 March 1960 with a Leica M290mm lens of a man previously photographed several times and in various postures could become one of the most well-known photographs globally, while being duplicated on absolutely all types of media more than any other image ever. On that day in March, a former fashion photographer, Alberto Diaz Gutierrez, who later renamed himself Corda, captured the famous image of Ernesto Guevara de la Serna, alias Che Guevara. A mass funeral procession was held on that day in Havana's city center to remember every single sailor or worker who died during the explosion of La Coubre, a French ship loaded with grenades and other ammunition. Philosophers like Jean-Paul Sartre and Simone de Beauvoir attended the march along with others. Also present was Corda, the photographer for the first published newspaper by the Revolutionary Union, The Revolution. Concerning the photo, Corda told the Times of London, "I decided to stand in the crowd and watch the proceedings through the viewfinder of my Leica, equipped with a medium telephoto lens. I clicked a few shots of the podium, but when she walked towards my camera, I immediately panned it. I snapped the picture and immediately thought about our newspaper cover. I turned the camera vertically, took another shot, and then the moment passed." It was later stated by Corda that Che showed his typical stoicism with absolute implacability etched across his face during that particular shot. 7 years after he died, his portrait of Che Guevara became the iconic image of rebellion and revolution for people all over. Up to this day, it is still very common in Cuban culture and across the globe. While Che was a controversial figure, whether you see him as a hero or a villain, the portrait remains. 8. Migrant Mother. Florence Owens Thompson was the face of the Great Depression for almost 90 years. However, for half that time, no one knew who she was. The Federal Resettlement Administration engaged several photographers during the Dust Bowl era to capture the plight of farm laborers. One of them was Dorothea Lange. It was in March 1936 that she drove past a sign advertising a pea pickers camp in Nipomo, California, and decided to go back and have a look after driving 20 miles past the sign. In this place, she captured a harrowed widow and her children using a series of photos in their tent and its environs. The famous one is Migrant Mother. Those particular efforts of Lange resulted in food totaling 20,000 pounds acquired through federal funding in that camp. Surprisingly, by the time it came, the family was not there anymore. Lange published the encounter in a 1960 piece for Popular Photography. Lange wrote about their meeting in this way: I did not ask her name or her history. Her age was 32. They were living on vegetables and birds from the fields the kids caught. She sold the tires of her car to get something to fill their stomachs. Florence Owens Thompson revealed her identity as the Migrant Mother to the public in 1978, when she was 75 years old and living in Modesto, California. Interviews with Thompson and her children showed that the popular story about the picture was not completely correct. During the 1930s, many of the farmers who were usually of European descent relocated from the Midwest to California because there were dust storms that were very harsh and hard to withstand. People always thought that the Migrant Mother was among these people. Nevertheless, that was not the truth about her identity at all. She belonged to the Cherokee Nation, residing around the current-day Oklahoma, where she was born in 1903. She made her way into California during the mid-1920s. This was long before both the Dust Bowl and the Great Depression occurred. The peasants of the camp suffered from crop failure, which did not affect her family in any way. Her family only made a brief stopover at the camp due to their car breaking down. Lange came by when some of the elder children, as well as Thompson's mate Jim Hill, had taken a trip to the city to have the car fixed. Additionally, they had not even sold their tires for food, as it was either a misunderstanding, a wrong recollection, or an exaggeration on Lange's side. Nevertheless, it was not easy for Thompson and her kids. This time around, she was the mother of 8 children. Thomas's first 6 kids' father died in 1931. She was a laborer on a farm where she would harvest grapes, potatoes, cotton, or any other crop that required help in California. She explained in an interview with one newspaper later on, "At that moment we were just there, somehow we lived. That's how I should put it." Thompson also said she wishes Lange never photographed her. "That's my picture hanging all over the world, and I can't get a penny from it," she said during an interview with the Associated Press. Since Lange was working for the federal government at the time, the photo series was and still is in the public domain. The family, however, finally warmed up to this picture. After gaining fame, Thompson encountered serious illnesses she couldn't manage but required expensive medical attention. Consequently, her kin formed the Migrant Mother Fund. Consequently, tens of thousands of dollars poured in from all parts of the world. According to one of her kids, "We never realized how many hearts Mama touched. We received many letters. This made us feel good about ourselves." 9. Lunch atop a skyscraper. A photograph that was captioned in the New York Herald Tribune as "Lunch atop a skyscraper" was taken by an unidentified photographer many years before the era of posting what you ate for lunch on social media. The laborer's apparent nonchalance and the lack of any visible safety measures helped create an iconic image. In so doing, it appears to capture a special moment in United States history. Shot in 1932, during the economic collapse of the Great Depression, this picture could be about the unstoppable optimism of Americans in general, or about the negligent use of poor low-class immigrants, perhaps a mixture of both. At the time, the site for the RCA building was under construction and later came to be known as 30 Rockefeller Plaza, where productions like Saturday Night Live and The Tonight Show starring Jimmy Fallon are done. Most of the men featured in this picture are unidentifiable to date. However, there has been an argumentative documentary by the name Men at Lunch 2012 on whether the guy holding a cigarette was a Mohawk Indian called Peter Rice, as alleged at times. Even though Joe Curtis and Joseph Eckner, third from right and third from left, respectively, were identified, 2 additional men among the group that were highlighted in the video were never identified by the filmmakers. This wasn't an unplanned photo session, as evident by the place. Instead, it was arranged utilizing real steel workers to promote the striking new building. Some individuals believe that there was some support beneath the men that provided for their safety, despite the uncertainty of such claims. 10. Steve McCurry, Afghan Girl, 1984. Steve McCurry's moving image of a 12-year-old Pashtun orphan in the Nasir Bagh refugee camp near Peshawar, Pakistan, is framed with a vivid red and turquoise green color that captures viewers' eyes. The photograph captures much emotion communicated through her piercing green eyes, as well as a fixed facial expression. "I saw this small girl with incredible eyes and understood right away that I would take no other picture except for this one." According to McCurry, who, before the Soviet invasion, had already taken photos of the rebel-controlled areas of Afghanistan, for which he was awarded the Robert Capa Gold Medal for Best Photographic Reporting from Abroad. The first time the girl, later identified as Sharbat Gula, had ever been captured in a photograph was when the Afghan refugees moved during the Soviet conflict, and it was classified as the most recognized photograph that appeared in the history of the National Geographic magazine. National Geographic photographer Steve McCurry created one of the most popular and frequently copied pictures worldwide, the Afghan girl. Sharbat Gula was a learner in a makeshift school at a refugee campsite. Another name that people call her is the Afghan Mona Lisa. 11. The raising of the flag in Iwo Jima. During World War II, 6 men were captured in Joe Rosenthal's Pulitzer-winning photo as they were raising the American flag at Iwo Jima. The image was used by the entire nation's government to uplift everyone's spirits in America. The war was raging at that time, so 3 of them died out of the 6 who were in it. If all of them died from this war, then it would cease to be an inspiring message any longer from our government. They therefore attempted to save the rest 3. 2 of them eventually agreed to leave the war. However, the 6th man, named Ira Hayes, decided that he would not be taken out. He later got out of war, though. From that day on, he felt guilty for his friends' deaths all his life. Rosenthal would later be charged with setting up the photograph before terming it as serendipity. In truth, it was a great shot by Rosenthal that turned out to have some luck in it. Iwo Jima's combat dragged on for 36 days, however. It took Marines only 5 days to get to Shirabachi, the highest point of the mountain on the 8-square-mile island. Right from the start, it was very fierce combat. The Japanese had 1 whole year to fortify the island with underground passages inside hillsides, guns placed in hidden positions, and networked bomb-proof shelters. Allied bombardments by air and sea could not weaken Marine attack preparations for this fortress at all. After landing, they were met with full resistance from the Japanese defenders, who were ready to defend every inch of volcanic rocks. Thus, on 23 February 1945, when the Marines summited Shirabaki and erected the first flag, it was a great morale booster for those who were fighting in the area below, as well as those who were serving in the seaside. The ships blew their horns when they saw the flag. There was gunfire and applause from the people fighting below. Just then, Japanese soldiers started shooting because the flag on top of that island's highest point was nothing but a brand new target for them, and at that moment they heard the sound of guns firing bullets around them near Mount Shirbachi. 12. Ian McMillan, Abbey Road, 1969. The Beatles were the world's largest band by the end of the 60s. However, during the making of their second-last album, Abbey Road, Scottish photographer Macmillan was brought in for the photo shoot due to Yoko Ono's recommendation. Macmillan was sitting on a step ladder right in the middle of Abbey Road when he clicked 6 shots of the Beatles as they crossed the road in front of their studio. A policeman was directing cars while this took place. It is one out of those 6 shots that would be identified as a picture that people all over the globe would know. The influence that the photo created amongst die-hard pop fans over more than 5 decades has transformed an unnoticed spot located in a peaceful residential area within St. John's Wood, just a humble crossing for that matter. It remains an attraction to tourists who appreciate popular culture, thus standing in as one of the areas they can't fail to visit. The most legendary album cover was captured on the street situated in northwest London, outside a well-known recording company, on August 8, 1969. The cover of the great record became complete with the image taken by the photographer Ian McMillan, who stood on Abbey Road, from where the record is named. In front of the studio where the Beatles did most of their recordings, was placed the zebra crossing, which later on became one of London's famous landmarks. Before the photo session started, Macmillan, a friend of John Lennon and Yoko Ono, added details that showed exactly how the group of 4 popular musicians might look standing on the crossing to the initial sketch of the potential cover image that was drawn by Paul McCartney. Macmillan took the picture of Abbey Road street sign, which appeared on the back cover of the album at a junction with Alexandra Road that is today non-existent. 13. Muhammad Ali vs. Sonny Liston, 1965. Muhammad Ali declared many times that he was the best of all, and nowhere did he prove it more exceptionally than in Neil Leifer's photograph of a dominating, roaring Ali standing over Liston, who lay flat on the canvas barely a minute and 44 seconds into the fight. The fight began at 10:40 p.m. on May 25, 1965. At that time, the ring was already covered with blue cigarette smoke plus some flashing lights. In Leifer's photo, Ali's look was even more mysterious, and his red gloves against his white shorts seemed to be clanging louder than before. Leifer, when asked about what he did differently, remarks that he was seated in front of the right rims, but still managed to get what he wanted, which is what separates awesome sports photographers from good ones. You have to have a piece of luck with sports photography. Rooney's black and white photo was broadcasted from AP Wire and appeared on front pages all around the country. After all these years, Lifer also got a snapshot in color onto the cover page regarding Sports Illustrated's issue of Century's Greatest Sports Photos. The photograph could give an impression of an extremely severe and at the same time bloody end to the match, but in reality, Ali is telling Liston to get up and fight sucker. Ali threw a chopping right to his head and Liston went down, but the punch was awkward and ineffective. In the aftermath of the ensuing chaos, this confused everybody, including the fans who screamed. However, Liston got up again after the picture had been taken, and the fight briefly continued before it was announced to be over because he failed to make it in time for the count. This swing was later dubbed as Ali's Phantom Punch, and it still stands out as a hot topic in boxing up to date. Because the circumstances surrounding the event were uncertain and unclear, most attendees, whether die-hard enthusiasts or professional aspirants within the industry, were not exactly certain of what had taken place. While some observers feel Liston was old and could not take the beating, it is still believed by many that he threw the fight, with theories ranging from involvement by the mafia to the fear of the black Muslims. Ali's and Liston's gloves were taken by the Maine Boxing Commission for investigation after the fight, but no definitive results were found. Eventually, numerous collectors had the gloves before they were put up for sale by auction in New York in 2015, where they fetched $956,000 from an unknown person. Ali hit Liston with a left hook in February 1964, and 5 years later, Liston died mysteriously in his Las Vegas house. 14. The Situation Room, 2011, White House. This picture captures President Barack Obama and his national security team as they are given updates on the top-secret Navy SEAL raid conducted on the Pakistani compound of one of the most sought terrorists in the United States of all times, Osama bin Laden, on the afternoon of May 1, 2011. The SEALs killed the brains behind the 9/11 attacks at 11:35 ET, when the head of state went live on national television. The picture was taken by Pete Souza, the photographer of the White House, after Obama and his cabinet had moved into a small meeting room in the West Wing Situation Room wing, where Brigadier General Marshal Brad Webb was overseeing the operation. On entering the room, Webb directed the president holding out his seat to him. However, as Obama told NBC News, he said, "You don't worry about it. You just focus on what you're doing. I'm sure we can find a chair and I'll sit right next to you." And that's how he ended up on a folding chair. The president of the USA later said that the raid where the SEAL helicopter crash landed in bin Laden's hideout was his longest 40 minutes. Conversely, Mrs. Clinton admitted that she had been so engrossed in following the proceedings that it never occurred to her that there was a photographer from the White House taking pictures. 15. VJ Day Celebration, 1945, New York City. This photo depicts a sailor kissing a woman dressed in white amidst Times Square, New York, on August 14, 1945, by a renowned photographer known as Alfred Eisenstadt, just after the groundbreaking news of Japan's surrender to the Allies heralding the end of the World War II, which later appeared in the Life magazine on August 27. Victor Jorgensen, a Navy lensman, also coincidentally captured the spur-of-the-moment kiss from another less celebrated angle. Neither of the photographers had an opportunity to ask the names of the couple locking lips. Eisenstadt said later that day, "There were thousands of people around at the time. Everyone was kissing each other." Over the years following this incident, various men and a couple of ladies have come out claiming that they were the pair in the picture, as it became very symbolic and indicative of peacetime frenzy. Sailor George Mendonça and Greta Zimmer were identified as the couple in a 2012 book titled The Kissing Sailor. George Mendonça, a sailor, and Greta Zimmer, a dental assistant who were strangers until he kissed her spontaneously, are identified in the book. Although people claim that they were the pair that kissed on the street at the time, there is no proof regarding it yet. George Mendonça was a sailor who was watching a movie with Rita Petri, said to be the most beautiful girl he had ever seen, when it was stopped. It was about this time that Japan had surrendered, hence the war was over. When he stepped out of the theater, he saw the first nurse, grabbed her and dipped her as he kissed her. The nurse was Greta Zimmer, while behind him stood Rita, but this was not noticed. They would later be married for 60 years. 16. Gandhi and his spinning wheel. This photograph is one of the most important and well-known images ever taken in the 20th century. Margaret Bourke White, who was the first woman to work for Life magazine, came across India shortly before the country became independent from Britain. White was informed by Gandhi's secretaries that she could only take a picture when she knew how to operate a spinning wheel herself. She learned how to do so. They further informed her that she wouldn't be able to communicate with him as he was having a silent day. There are hardly any figures in the world that are as renowned in the 20th century as Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, whom everyone knows just by looking at his picture. He was born on 2nd October 1869. Among different pictures representing his life or principles, perhaps none has come closer to symbolizing them all than this image of him taken by Margaret Bourke-White in 1946, sitting next to one of the spinning wheels he loved most. During the spring of 1946, when Bourke-White's film was being sent from India to Life's New York offices, the significance of the spinning wheel is explained in typed notes. Every day at 4, Gandhi spins for an hour, and all members of his ashram are expected to do the same. Spinning is something he encourages everyone to do, including his followers. He was even able to convince me to abandon my camera for the same. When I told him, "Both photography and spinning are crafts," he replied, "But spinning is the greater of the two." Gandhi and his supporters have elevated spinning almost to the status of religion. The spinning wheel is their sort of icon. They talk about spinning in superlatives, as though it were the most poetic thing ever, and they say it cures everything. 17. That photo of Marilyn Monroe. This photo for the 1954 movie. The 7-year itch is a still that shows Marilyn Monroe standing over a New York City subway air duct which is giving way to wind and which caused her skirt to fly upward. It can be called the most famous image of Monroe, who is still one of America's most iconic tragic celebrities, because nobody knows about the cause of her death. On September 15, 1954, Marilyn Monroe in New York City was standing on a subway grate wearing a mini white dress and fighting an upward breeze. The scene from the 7-year itch went on to be one of the most iconic moments in movie history. Nevertheless, the director of this movie, Billy Wilder, did not show everything that happened during this scene. Yet, this scene had repercussions that extended far beyond embarrassing the young people who watched it. And even though DiMaggio received loud applause, he was not happy with what he considered an indecent scene. According to the photographer George S. Zimbel, everything suddenly came to a stop when Monroe's reportedly dissatisfied husband crossed the stage and exited dramatically. On returning to California, she filed for divorce against the baseball player after they had engaged in a physical and public fight at the hotel following the photo session. At 1:30, the subway grate situated at the intersection between Lexington Avenue and 52nd Street in New York City was crowded with manufacturing workers. Such was the magic of cinema. The scene took 3 hours to film and 14 takes to get the shot right. At that time, 100 men who belonged to the press took photographs while 2,000 to 5,000 people shouted every time her skirt blew up. Instead, it took them another 14 tries, as among other things, the persistent noise from the large numbers of fans who had converged on the set made it impossible. The following year, they redid it at the Fox lot in California, but used the initial location shots in commercials and promotions. Also, Marilyn stopped the dress from flying off over her head. She took precautions to ensure that it would not rise too high. For example, she put on 2 pairs of white shorts to avoid a real sighting once the air fan lifted it. 18. Portrait of Steve Jobs. One of the most famous portrait photographers is Albert Watson, who always aims to create something exceptional when he is taking images of notable people. Steve Jobs didn't like anyone taking photos of him, so Albert had to come up with something quickly to get that special picture within a short period. Albert remembered, "I took a risk." He once told Jobs that, if he gave just him an hour, he could accomplish what was required for the job within half that time. He reacted as though I had given him a gift, for half an hour meant everything to those with an overfilled schedule. In the long run, though, all Albert required was 1/3 of that coveted golden time. His method, like he did whenever he was doing what he knew best, was to keep it simple. Steve Jobs, represented here, has an exceptional impact on the viewer than anywhere else. Albert accomplished this by putting him in the place of someone taking a passport photo while standing against a white background. After asking him to lean forward slightly, and then telling him, "Think that there are 4 or 5 people seated across the table who disagree with you, but you know you are right." In that instant, Steve Jobs' intelligence, intensity, and conviction were captured by the lens of the camera. So he looked at it when going away and requested for it, because according to him it was possibly the finest photograph ever taken of him. A few years passed, and one day as he was packing up, he received a call from John Dowling, who was then the head of PR at Apple. He inquired whether Albert still had the photograph, and if so, he would require it urgently. Albert immediately sensed the urgency, got the picture, and sent it over to Dowling. It later emerged that Steve Jobs had passed away that evening. Apple announced Jobs' death on its website together with Albert's portrait on October 5, 2011.